Dr. Sarah Taylor from LSE Life, who has a wealth of experience and insight in terms of dissertations across a range of disciplines at the LSE, and has been overseeing a program to assist and advise students on this crucial part of master's programs across the school. So she'll be, she's been providing this kind of guidance to students in the department in preceding years through face-to-face lectures and Q&A. So we'll do what we can with Zoom to replicate that in terms of the substance and the structure of her talk. So I will hand you over to her, and she will be recording this for those of you who aren't here live in concert, as it were. So I'll mute myself and turn things over to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Just one very quick question. I've planned, so the session will take the full hour. I don't know if you need to see them afterwards or if they've got something else to go to, but I'm willing to hang around for a bit if they have questions. But I haven't planned question time in the session. I think it'll be a bit tight for that. But I can hang around for a bit. I don't mind.
Great. Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. All right, then I'm going to get started. Looks like everyone who's coming is here. Hi, everyone. Very nice to see you all, and thanks to John for introducing me. Could I just ask you at the beginning the usual Zoom things? You know what to do. Just make sure your microphone's on mute so we don't have background noise. I'm going to pop the handout into the chat now. So if you could download that, you're going to need it during the session. And I will be putting you into breakout rooms a couple of times for some activities. So when you're in your breakout rooms, try to have your camera on. That's not necessary now, but when you're in your rooms, it's not even necessary in the breakout rooms, but if you can, do try. Also choose a spokesperson to feedback when I bring you back to the main room, and make a note of your room number. So if I say room number 5, you know who you are. And when you're in your breakout rooms, if you don't know, there is an ask for help button on your toolbar, or there will be when you're in the room. So you can always call me if you need any help. Okay, I'm gonna just quickly pop the handout in the chat. Looks like everyone's here. Hope I don't have too many problems. Sorry, bear with me for a few seconds. I can't put it in the chat too early because then people who come in late can't see it. So it's one of those Zoom foibles. Okay. Oh no, sorry, 1 second. There's always something. I thought I closed it, but I left it open, so it won't let me attach it. Apologies, a million apologies. Right, take 2. Okay, you should be able to see that now. Sorry for the hiccups there. Righty-ho. So let's plow on then. So my colleague Philip spoke to you last term a bit about planning your dissertation and narrowing, focusing, choosing a research question, and so on. So I believe he spoke to you about coming up with the topic area that you're interested in, selecting one particular aspect, generating possible questions, and then coming up with your research question. So the next kind of main step in your process, I believe, is your synopsis that you've got to write and submit on the 12th of March. So you've been asked to submit a 3 to 4 page outline of your topic, which has a 1-page synopsis, some chapter headings and subheadings, and an indicative bibliography. So today I'm going to try and help you with that by doing the following things. So first of all, have a very quick look at your research question again and how you can continue to focus that. I'm going to get you thinking about how to structure your dissertation, and we'll look at some examples just to help make sense of that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the literature and academic debates, because those are an extremely important part of your dissertation. And then I'm going to give you a little practical exercise in mapping out your whole dissertation, just to help you with that planning process. So hopefully these things will all help you with putting together your synopsis and your plan for a few weeks' time. So in terms of focusing your research questions, apologies about the cat. He's a bit of an attention seeker. He has to be in all of my classes, so just ignore him. In terms of your research question, I suppose the most important question you want to ask yourself, and this will be your research question, is what exactly do I want to find out from this study? And once you think you know that, there are two important questions you need to ask yourself. The first is, can I answer this question with the data or with the literature I have available or I can access? And can I answer this question within the scope of the project, which is your 10,000 words? And if the answer is no to either of those questions, you need to rethink the question or to keep focusing. And it's really important to remember that your research question can be revised a number of times, and it's unusual for it not to be revised several times. So don't worry too much about doing that. In terms of what is a good research question, just a few ideas here for you that I got from the website that's cited below. I'll ask John after this session to share the slides so you can easily link to things I've linked in here. So just some basic information about good research questions, bad research questions. So a good research question shouldn't have a simple answer. It should be fairly open-ended, but not too open-ended, because bearing in mind that that scope that you have, you're quite limited in how much you can do in the time and the word count available. Bad research questions would have a very simple answer. For example, a yes/no question, yes/no answer, or one-word answer, a number, something like that. So beware of asking questions that could be answered with one word. Good research questions should be researchable. That sounds a little bit obvious, but as we said before, you should be able to answer your question with accessible research facts and data. So you should be able to access the literature you need to answer this question, or the data you need to answer this question. And then obviously a bad research question can't be answered. Either there's no answer, it's not possible to answer, or you can't access the information that you need to answer it. Good research questions should open the door for other areas of research and inquiry. Don't forget that you are now a researcher within your field. You're part of the body of knowledge that's being generated. You're adding to that body of knowledge. So not only are you adding to what people have done before, but you're kind of opening pathways for more research in the future. So don't forget that you're part of that big process. A bad research question can only be answered with an opinion. And when I say an opinion here, I don't mean an argument, I mean an actual opinion, like what is the best theory, for example. So the best is a pure opinion. It's not something that could be assessed, or would be very difficult to make a very good argument about the best in those terms. Good research questions often begin with things like how, or what, or which, or to what extent. And bad ones might begin with who, or when, or where, or how much, or how many. Again, that's related to the answer being a one-word answer or being too simple. And then finally, a good research question should explore a gap in the current research that is of interest in your field. So something that you think is missing, something you think you can add to the body of knowledge in your field. Whereas a bad question, we say it doesn't pass the so what test. In other words, nobody really cares, or it's something that isn't missing from your research, from the research at all. I'm going to move on now and talk a bit more about structure, but if you do want more help with developing your research question, I am running a workshop called Develop Your Research Question. I've got one tomorrow and one more on the 11th of March, I think. But just check, this link will take you there, or check our webpage if you're interested. You also might find it helpful to book a one-to-one with an LSE Life study advisor. Our study advisors are fabulous. You can, even if you don't really know what you want to talk about, you can just make an appointment, bounce ideas off them, and they can help you focus your thinking. So do make use of that facility. But let's have a look at structure now. So let's get you guys involved. So what elements would you expect to find in a dissertation? What kinds of things? And you can just go ahead and type that into the chat. Let me open the chat so I can see what you're writing. So go ahead and write in the chat, what kind of elements would you expect to find in a dissertation? So we've got literature review. Keep going, guys, just type whatever you think. Lovely, lovely, keep going. Got methodology, analysis, great, theoretical framework, lovely. Data, cases, good, good. Empirical research, discussion. Great. Any more ideas? Conclusion, yes. Case study, good, good. Any more ideas? Keep them coming. Abstract, yeah, good. Okay. Research question, definitely. Okay, folks. I'm critics of the argument, lovely, lovely, yes. I might have slightly confused, well, not confused you, misled you by using the word elements, and I used that on purpose because I don't want you to think of chapters that you absolutely have to have without the dissertation. So quite rightly, you've talked about things like critiques of arguments, case studies and that sort of thing. Case study would probably be a type of dissertation, though you might have case studies as examples within your dissertation. Similarly, empirical research would be a type of research rather than an element or a part of it. Otherwise, lovely. Let's have a look at what I've written, which coincides with what most of you have written. So I've said here indicative elements of a dissertation because I do want to emphasize that these will not necessarily be chapter headings in your dissertation. But typically a dissertation will have an introduction and a conclusion, just like any other piece of academic writing. You will definitely have reference to literature in your dissertation. You're very likely to have a theoretical framework that you're using, methodology that you're using. You will have analysis and discussion in some form. So those are, as I said, they're elements, but they're not prescriptive chapter headings. So you might structure your dissertation quite differently from those headings. In other words, you might formulate your own headings and do different things within those headings. For example, your methodology might be described quite briefly in your introduction. So if you're doing a desk-based dissertation, you're not doing an empirical study, your methodology might be very brief, describing, you know, what literature, how you're going to use your literature, what you're going to argue, how you're going to argue it. So that might quite easily be covered within your introduction. Or you might want to have a short chapter on it. If you do an empirical study, it is fairly traditional to have a whole methodology section where you explain how you are gathering your data. Your chapters might be topic-based, so you might have a topic, of your chapter, and then within your chapter you might have a brief description of your methodology, your theoretical framework, use your literature throughout, an analysis and discussion within each chapter. Your literature might form the basis of the whole body of your research, rather than being a separate chapter. And that's quite typical if you're doing a desk-based study rather than an empirical study. So just to pull all of those things together, you definitely need an introduction and a conclusion. Those are pretty traditional. And you need those main elements in some form or another. But some might be much more briefly explained than others and won't necessarily need their own chapter. Like we talked about the methodology if you're not doing an empirical study. So key point is that you need to design a structure that works for your research project, for your research question and what you want to do with it. However, I cannot recommend strongly enough that you go and look at examples of what other students have done. And on your Moodle page, there are quite a few examples of previous dissertations. So you can get an idea of what is possible, what works, and how other students have managed structure. But for today, let's do an activity to make this a little bit more concrete. So I have pulled out 3 examples of tables of contents from student dissertations. And they are on your handout. So if anybody's come late, I'll share the handout one more time in case you can't see it in the chat. I'll pop it in the chat. I want you to look at those tables of contents and see where you think these elements might have been included in those dissertations. Now, you might have read them because I pulled these from the ones on your Moodle page, but don't worry if you haven't. You should be able to get some idea from the headings of where these elements might be within those chapters. So for this activity, I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms. And I'm going to give you just 6 minutes. So spend about 2 minutes discussing each one, but do talk to the other people in your rooms. Let me just share, sorry, I'll just share that handout one more time in case anybody came late. Okay, I've shared that. I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms now. So 6 minutes to discuss those 3 examples on your handout. All right, I'm opening the rooms. Don't forget to click join when you're invited. Oops, sorry, I thought I clicked on open rooms. I didn't. Don't forget to click join.
Did you assign me to a breakout room on purpose, or was that?
I just used the automatic function.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So yeah, just don't join. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'll just skip it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few people haven't joined. Anybody having problems, let me know. Okay, no, disappearing.
One concern I always have is that the use of the term chapters might it might sort of encourage or enable students to kind of think of a dissertation as, you know, and to write their dissertation perhaps unconsciously as a set of separate parts rather than, and I always worry about that there isn't a better term for it perhaps. I mean, you know,
yeah.
but that the term chapter is like, you know, if you read a novel, you can read one chapter and then it shifts to the perspective of someone else and then someone else. And then, you know, that it's a term that's kind of unfortunate in the context of such a short piece of work. That, you know, I hope this, I always caution students against taking that term chapter to mean anything that
Yeah.
would inhibit them or dissuade them from forcing themselves to really think of the dissertation as a single unified whole.
I'll bring that up. Thank you. That's a good point. I'm sorry. Se-Young, did you just join us or did you fall out of a breakout room?
Sorry, I just joined the.
Oh, that's no problem. I'm going to pop you into a breakout room. The students who are in that room can tell you what they're doing. Okay.
Yeah. So you download the document that's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
I'll pop it in the chat again. You might not be able to see it if you've just joined. It's one of Zoom's weaknesses. Okay, I just popped it in again. That's what they're working with. And I'm going to put you in the breakout room. There's just a couple more minutes left. 20. Yeah, that's a really good point. I will hopefully those examples do make that clear, because a couple of them are really nice. They look like a narrative, so that's quite helpful.
We had kind of peer-to-peer workshop sessions in the first week of the term with small groups of students, kind of facilitated by PhD students, and it seemed to have gone so well in terms of the feedback. I've organized a second round and tried to allocate students in accordance roughly with their interests, like some kind of overlap. And that's happening on Wednesday and Thursday. So that there's an hour and a half, and then 3, 4, or 5, students with a PhD facilitator. They will each, talk about, where they're at, and then get feedback from one another with the PhD student kind of moderating and helping them along. So hopefully that will complement today's lecture presentation.
That's brilliant. I love that idea. And I did some workshops last year. I might do them again this summer. We had dissertation, what do we call them? Dissertation cafes,
right.
Where we got students to do the same thing. Yeah, I really like that, because it gets them talking about it, asking the right questions, and kind of getting out of their own heads. Yeah.
And on the one hand, I think hopefully it was reassuring, because they all realize that they're not the only one who's nervous and clueless and confused.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they could also help one another.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, that's such a good point about knowing that you're not the only one who feels clueless, because that's such a barrier to asking questions or asking for help when you think you're the only one and you don't want to look stupid. It's really valuable. That I agree with you.
Well, what I try to reinforce to these students, that they should not know the answer to their question at this point. That if that there are students who have an answer, but they don't have a question, and that's not a good place to be. You think, oh, I know what I'm doing, but if you're not proceeding with some sense of curiosity and some sense of an intellectual kind of exploration, then you've got it backwards.
Mm. That's also a really good point. Yes, I hadn't thought that students might do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Get students to say, I want to argue this.
Yeah.
This is what I want to argue.
That's not how it works.
This is my framework. It's like, well, go ahead and just argue that till you're blue in the face, and then just cherry pick the evidence and prove that you're right. And
that's a good point. Yeah, I guess that is a danger when you're not doing empirical research, isn't it? Is it still the case that you prefer students not to do empirical studies for this dissertation? Because that's what Katharina said to me last year, that you sort of encourage them not to do.
Well, not any primary research.
Yeah, that's what I'm sorry.
But it could be that they engage in a kind of exercise that draws on secondary literature and compares a set of cases.
Okay.
And so it can be empirical in terms of trying to explain empirically observable patterns in international relations, but it wouldn't be doing that through primary data analysis or anything like that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Oops. Okay. I'm going to bring them back. Time is hurtling away from us. Okay. Hi, folks. Welcome back. We'll just wait for everyone. Okay, we should have everybody now. Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to talk through those structures. Let's just have a quick look at them. Let's try getting voluntary participants rather than me calling on specific rooms. So I hope you remember to join a spokesperson. If not, just speak out. But just unmute yourself. Would anyone like to talk about the first example?
Yeah, I can.
Go for it, Elizabeth. Thank you.
We were discussing in our group that we felt that this was more of a kind of, well, telling us a story or a narrative, as opposed to the other ones that we were looking at. And we felt it read quite well, just kind of getting an overview of it, that it was what you've been discussing on the slide before, that it might be divided into topics, and your literature and critical analysis is probably woven throughout as opposed to neatly sectioned off.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you. And I just want to raise a point. John and I were chatting while you were in your breakout rooms, and he said he's always a bit nervous about talking about chapters because he doesn't want students to think of them as separate stories. They should all be part of the narrative. So I'm glad you used that word narrative. And this is quite a nice example of how that flow does occur across the chapters. Yes, thank you very much. Any other comments from other groups? There is one slightly traditional chapter.
In our group, we were discussing about analysis and discussion. So we thought that both these elements related to a lot of topics and subtopics, and we were kind of confused about the difference between the two. And then, yeah, because we thought that both these elements relate to a lot of the subtopics. So,
yeah. Very, very good point and good question. With these topics, it's quite, let me show you what I said. Here's one I prepared earlier. So as Elizabeth said before you, I think that the chapters, there's a thread all the way through of discussion of the literature, discussion of the argument, and there's analysis and discussion probably happening at the same time. Now, we can't see exactly what's going on from the headings alone. You would need to read it, but from the way it's been written, that's what I would guess is what's happening with the structure here. There might be a brief discussion of methodology in the introduction, so explaining how the analysis is going to pan out over the dissertation. And I've highlighted the first heading, the Gramscian hegemony. It says a theoretical framework for analysis. So the student has flagged and said, this is the framework I'm using to analyze the rest of my stuff, which is this non-territorial autonomy, which is the topic of the rest of the dissertation. In terms of the difference between analysis and discussion, analysis really is the picking apart and trying to understand things. If you think about what the word analyze means, if you analyze something, you look at it very closely. So if I want to understand this pen, I might sort of take it apart and try to look at the different bits of it and see how it works. What does it mean? And then the discussion might be, what does this mean more broadly for the field, or for that specific aspect of the field. But there can be considerable overlap. Yeah. Thank you very much. Example 2. Oops, sorry. I'm just trying to stop things flapping over the slide, so in the recording it's easy to see. Anybody want to talk about example 2? This is much more traditional. You're gone shy on me. Anybody want to make a comment? What elements did you find? This is the easiest one. What elements did you find in this one? Go for it. I can only see your email address, so I don't know your name, but you waved at me. Yes, carry on.
Yeah, we talked about how this one is kind of traditional and really straightforward.
Yeah.
Because well, it tells you from the headlines what it's going to talk about, the introduction, then the theoretical framework, the methodology, the analysis. And I actually had a question because I was a bit confused with the case study. So because you said your dissertation is either a case study or a desk study, but can the case study be a part of your dissertation, like a third part or a fourth part? Or
yeah, sorry, I didn't if I said that, that's not quite correct. Well, that's not what I meant. When I said desk study, I mean you're not doing primary research, you're not going out and gathering the data yourself, but you can use secondary research. So you can use literature, you can use things other people have written about for your dissertation yourself. So that's the distinction I was trying to make between primary research, where you gather your own data, or what I was calling desk-based, where you can get from other people, other data or literature and so on. A case study is a specific kind of, it can be a specific kind of dissertation where you look at one specific case in detail. So you might look at one, I don't know, one aspect of international relations within one specific country and one specific aspect of international relations. And that could be your case study, that you're just examining what that country did, for example, and evaluating it. Or you can use a case study as an example, as a small part of your dissertation, which was your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else want to comment on example 2? Okay. Yeah, so this one's very straightforward. The students use those traditional headings: theoretical framework, methodology, and analysis. And the discussion would be part of the analysis in this one. Last example, anybody want to chat about this one?
Can I?
Please.
I think this approach is quite different from the 2 examples above. In a way, it has kind of a rationale. I'm not sure whether we are supposed to have one, considering that the 2 others doesn't have. And the other thing was, while the subtop, the actual number 1 says conceptual framework, but then going by the subheading, I see it is a more of a literature review. So I was thinking, what distinguishes literature review from the overall conceptual framework? So our understanding was conceptual framework should be the approach of the research, not necessarily of the literature that is related to the very subject of study. So yeah. Yeah.
Good points all. I'll start with your mention of the rationale. This is, you know, why is the student chosen this topic? They've chosen to make a whole chapter of it, or a whole section of it, which perhaps is slightly unusual. You're going to have your rationale somewhere because you're going to explain why you're talking about this. I suppose the introduction is the most logical place for that to be, so it's likely to be in there. And there's nothing wrong with having it as a separate section, but it's not necessary, as you've pointed out. In terms of the difference between conceptual framework and literature, this can be a little bit confusing and hard to pick apart. Typically, your literature, you're going to have literature everywhere because your literature means what other people have written. So that's going to be in all through your dissertation. Your conceptual framework, also called your theoretical framework sometimes, will often be the way that you're looking at something. So I don't know enough about international relations to figure out exactly what the student is talking about here just from the headings. But they're talking about critical IR approaches and post-colonial responses, I presume, as a way of post-colonial international relations as a lens through which to look at the other issues they discuss within the dissertation. Perhaps the earlier example of the Gramscian hegemony is an easier example to understand in terms of theoretical framework. So they're using Gramsci's idea of hegemony as a way of analyzing things, as a way of looking at things. So I presume, I haven't read this whole dissertation, that the student talks about critical IR and post-colonial IR as their as a theoretical way of understanding international relations, and then goes on to their main discussions. But all very good questions. So we've got your conceptual framework is literature, as you pointed out, and then the rest of it will be literature analysis. The last chapter, Ways Forward, suggests more of a discursive chapter where the students pulling together what all of this means and what it means looking forward to. How do we move forward with this information that we've pulled together in the course of the research. So that looks like a fairly traditional discussion chapter. Okay, folks, let's move on because we are rapidly running out of time. I will hang around for a bit at the end, so if you have any questions, just jot them down and I will be happy to take questions at the end. Just to go back to this notion of literature and academic debates, as I said briefly at the beginning, your discussion of your literature might be a separate chapter. So if you're doing primary research so your very kind of traditional model of research where you write your methodology chapter, you review some literature, and then you go and collect your data and analyze that data. If you did that model, then your literature review is very often a separate chapter where you set up, this is the sort of theory I'm looking at, this is the previous research that's been done on my topic, and this is what's missing, and this is what I'm going to be looking at. And then if you do that model of research, you also need to refer back to that literature in your analysis and discussion. So it's forming the basis of your analysis. So you need to keep talking about it when you analyze and discuss your data. If you're doing what I've been calling a desk-based study, where you're looking at other people's data or other literature, here the relevant literature and the academic debates are likely to happen throughout your dissertation, and they're going to make the basis of your analysis and discussion. So that's the distinction between one chapter versus all the way through. it's really, really important to think about how you're going to frame your literature and your academic debates. It's the foundation of your whole project, because this situates your study within your field of research, as I mentioned earlier. So whatever you're studying isn't occurring in a vacuum. You need to be part of what other people are saying in your field and adding to that body of knowledge. Your literature also informs the decisions that you make. So as you read, it's going to help you think about things, analyze things, change your viewpoint, make your arguments, do all of those things. Your literature also provides your rationale for your research questions. So you'll be reading and reading and then thinking, well, we need to ask this question because I don't know, we don't know what the answer is, and I want to know what the answer is. And of course, any arguments that you do make need to be supported with reference to the literature and the academic debates from your field. So your literature should be a thread that runs through your whole project. 3 key points. It needs to be precise, no irrelevant literature. This sounds obvious, but it's when you do a lot of reading and take lots of notes and write about things a lot, you put a lot of work into it, it's quite hard to let go of it. So what we tend to do is write a lot, draft chapters, and then we have too much and then we have to cut it down. And it's at the cutting stage where it's really hard to let go of things that we spent a lot of time working on. So this is where you have to be quite brutal and make sure you're cutting out things that are not relevant to the research that you are producing, the research that you are doing. The other side of that is it needs to be sufficient. So you need to have enough literature to support those arguments that you're making. What is enough is one of those questions, how long is a piece of string question? It's impossible to say what is enough, but you should get a feel for it as you're reading. Have you read most of the main pieces of literature related to your specific question, or is there still a lot of stuff out there that you haven't read? And also, don't forget about your course literature. Whatever you decide to discuss in your dissertation might be different from things that you studied on your courses, but you must make sure that you're relating your research to the main debates that have been going on in IR that you have been studying. So don't forget to look at your course literature, make sure you're thinking about those things and relating them to your dissertation research. Of course, it's an iterative process. You'll be adding and removing literature continually through your process of writing. So when you're putting together your indicative bibliography that you need to hand in a couple of weeks, think about these things. It is an indicative bibliography, so it is likely to change as you keep working. But think about literature that is probably most useful for what you want to study at this stage. Just a point about writing now, although that's probably not on your mind at the moment. We often talk about writing up research, and I think this is extremely misleading because it sounds like you just do lots of research, you read, do your data gathering if you need to do data gathering, and then finally, after a long time, you write everything up. And that's misleading because that's not what you're doing at all. It's not what you should be doing. You should be writing the whole way through the process, particularly if you're doing a desk-based study. So you should be summarizing ideas from your literature. You should be making arguments about what you've read. You should be analyzing what you've read and analyzing your own arguments. And the reason you do this is not only to have something written, but because this writing is very much part of your research process. So it's important to keep that going all the way along. And definitely don't leave writing until the last minute. Keep it up all the way through the process. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about today is storyboarding, which is a way to plan your dissertation to, oops, sorry, I leaned on my keyboard. to conceptualize and to map out your dissertation. Now, storyboarding we usually associate with film or theatre, and it looks like in the picture here where people actually draw what's going to happen in each scene and how things are going to work so that they can see how the whole story is going to work together. So it's a really useful strategy because it's a way to see the whole piece of something in a visual way. And because it's visual, it's a chance to break away from linear thinking. So you can see things as a plan or a pattern rather than step by step. You can use it to create a kind of prototype for your dissertation. So this is the overall blueprint, if you like, of what you want to do. And that gives you the chance to see if you've got plot holes, if you've got things that are missing or places where you need to spend more time thinking. So a research storyboard won't have, well, it can have pictures, but pictures are not going to be the main thing like a film storyboard. What you're likely to have is an outline for each chapter and subchapter with some notes on the key points that you want to make in those chapters or sections, the key discussions that you want to engage in, and maybe some key references or sources that you want to talk about in those sections. So let's have a look at an example so this can become a little bit more real. So I've stolen this from my colleague Jenny. This is her storybook for her master's dissertation, which looked at social cultural constructions of masculinity and father and son relationships in the work of Robert Cormier. So on this page, you can see she's done a paper version, big piece of paper, and she's used post-it notes, which are quite useful because you can use different colors. They're easy to swap around and replace if you want to change something. So she's got her sections that she wants to have. For example, in the introduction, she's first of all going to introduce Cormier and the text. Then the second section would be looking at young adult fiction versus children's literature. Then the third section, why masculinity and relating to Cormier, then an outline of the discussion, and so on. So you can see the sections, and then the yellow post-its are the key points, and then the orangey ones are the key references she wants to make. And you can see she's done the same for the literature review. I won't go through it all because that's of limited value. This is a typed version, and this is a much more detailed one. This is where she took her literature review and broke it down into parts so she could look at things in much more detail. But again, in the box is the main sections that she's got in each part. And then under that, the key arguments she wants to make in that part. And then under that, the key references. She also wrote down how many paragraphs she's going to need and an approximate word count as well. So that's a very detailed storyboard. So the benefits of storyboarding, as I mentioned earlier, it helps you to see the full thing, what it looks like, which is really useful to see how well it's working. It's also much easier to see each section, what's in it, and how the section fits in with the rest of the piece of work. So you've got that flow going through. It's easy to see where you've got things missing or problems or areas where you need a bit more clarification. It's much easier to make changes at the storyboard level than when you've written a whole draft, for example. So this level of planning can save you a lot of time later on. Oops, sorry. Two types of storyboarding, or sorry, two levels of storyboarding. Your early storyboarding, which is what we're going to do or perhaps start today. We don't have much time. So your early storyboarding is quite a short process. This is where you just map out the whole picture of your work. And then the second level is full storyboarding. And this is where you go into a lot more detail. So you might pad out your sections and subsections with short summaries. short summaries of paragraphs that you're planning to write, include images, charts, or figures that you want to include, or maybe have some quotes or some notes on key references. The second example I showed you of Jenny's literature review is a good example of full storyboarding. So today we'll probably just spend about 5 minutes on this, but I'll give you some tools so you can keep doing this after the session. But we're going to look at, we're going to try early storyboarding today. The aim of which is to see the whole picture of your work, and hopefully this will really help you plan for your synopsis that you need to write in, that you need to hand in a couple of weeks. So think of this as a starting point, but do keep adding to and revising your storyboard throughout the process of writing your dissertation. You'll find it invaluable, not only in terms of structure, but that's a kind of side effect. It's more useful just in terms of planning your thinking, keeping control of your thinking, because when you've got a lot of ideas going on, it can get quite messy in your head. So it's a good way, a really visual way of keeping control, keeping an eye on how things are all working within your research. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to pop you back into your breakout rooms and give you 5 minutes maybe to talk about some of these things. You can use paper or an electronic device to storyboard your dissertation. So think about what possible chapter headings you might have, how you're going to structure your dissertation. Where is your literature going to go? What are your key sources? And what chapter subheadings might you have? Some resources you might want to use. There's 2 websites here I've got links to. You can easily just type a search into Google. One is Storyboard, that's quite a nice one. One is Linoit. You can use the PowerPoint slide sorter function. If you go into PowerPoint view and click on slide sorter, you can write things on the slides and move them about, which is quite useful. I've also made a storyboard template in Microsoft Word, which I will pop into the chat if you like, just a plain Microsoft Word document to work on. So sadly, we've only got 5 minutes left on the session. So I was going to say spend 5 minutes storyboarding and then 5 minutes discussing. But let's just spend the 5 minutes talking to your roommates in your breakout rooms about how you think your dissertation might start to be taking shape in terms of chapters or sections. So how, what sort of chapter headings might you have at this stage? How do you think, roughly speaking, you've got to organize your dissertation and set out your arguments? If you have any questions, do pop them in the chat or ask for help in your breakout rooms and I will come and explain further. So 5 minutes to talk to your group about how you're currently planning to set out the structure of your dissertation. I'm just going to move a couple of people around. Oops. No, we're all clear. Sorry, we've lost a few people, so I just need to even out the rooms a bit. All right, I'm opening the rooms. Don't forget to click join. Oh, a couple of people have dropped out. Sorry, guys. Let me just, Rebecca, do you know which room you were in last time?
I think I was with Taylor.
I can't find Taylor. You don't know which room number?
No, I don't know the room number, unfortunately.
Last name is Springborn.
Yeah, that's her last name.
I think we may have lost her. I can't see her. Were you in room 13?
Possibly. I don't mind whichever room's free.
All right, sorry. Yeah, I'm just going to pop you into another room if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. And M.I. Barkin, sorry, I don't know your name. I've only got your email address. Do you know which room you were in?
It's Maya Barkin.
Hi, Maya.
Hi.
Do you know which room you were in?
No, I joined a bit late.
Okay, no worries. I will pop you into room 2.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Oh. How did that happen? I thought I put her in room 2, but she's room 1. Okay, everyone's in there. That's a shame. Took a bit longer than I expected, so not much time to storyboard.
Do you have to go at 4?
No, but I didn't want to. No, I'll stay and take some questions. I just didn't want to force students to stay.
Right.
They were planning for it to end at 4.
Sure.
But hopefully they can talk about the process and then go away and put their things on their plans. I forgot to mention the what are they called, the meetings that you're organizing with the PhD students?
We're just calling them workshop sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might suggest they can storyboard and bring those to the workshop sessions. They might find it a useful way to.
Yeah, I mean, we did send out a a form that's kind of formulaic in terms of a structured way of talking through and questions about the dissertation, but it might work quite well, with the storyboarding process. So yeah, and I think maybe for this generation, having those sorts of visual ways of trying to represent what they're doing is something that they're familiar with and comfortable with and tend to resort to anyway.
I think so. It's always slightly alien to me because I'm very linear and very writing orientated. So I really have to work very hard to try and look at things in different ways to help students who like to look at things in different ways. But yeah, I think it's really helpful for people like me to say, actually, let's look at this in a visual way. Let's draw some pictures or make a big mind map or something to look at it. I think it's yeah.
There's always the danger on the opposite side, and I've seen this with PhD students. People can think that if you can represent something visually, then you figured it out. Whereas, as you said, if you can't put verbs after nouns, if you can't actually construct coherent sentences, then you're kind of kidding yourself that it all makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think in terms of visualizing the whole thing, this is really useful because I think when you're writing something that's so long, you get lost in the detail, don't you? And you often don't see, like you're talking about the chapters not being cohesive, often happens if you're not seeing the whole picture, which I think this can be really helpful.
Right.
In creating that. Oh, I forgot to check the time.
It's just after 4, so.
All right, I might bring them back then. Hi, folks. You should all be back. I'm really sorry to rush you. You're probably just getting into your conversations. I just didn't want to force anybody to stay who might have other places to go. I will, as I said at the beginning, hang around now to answer a few questions. I hope you'll find that storyboarding useful as you're moving forward, planning your synopsis and planning even past that for your whole dissertation. If you need further help with your dissertation research from LSE Life, we do have quite a few workshops going on. The easiest way to find out about those is to sign up for our weekly updates. And then we'll send you an email every week and tell you what we're doing. On Moodle, we've got loads of materials on dissertation writing, so do go and have a browse around there at things to find things you might find useful. And as I mentioned earlier, you can always book a one-to-one with the study advisor. So thanks very much for listening, folks. I'll hang about for a while now if you have any questions. You can pop them in the chat if you prefer, or you could just raise your virtual hand so I can see that you've raised your hand. And then I'm happy to take questions. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Ania.
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
I was wondering, particularly the 3 examples that we went through, particularly the last part, there was way forward. So I found it quite confusing in a sense, particularly from the IR perspective and the kind of dissertation we do. So way forward, it would mean kind of a policy prescription or certain going forward. So generally, I find the conclusion as an appropriate thing. So what would be your kind of advice on including such a way forward in the topic as a different topic?
John might prefer to answer this, as this seems to be an IR related question. I'll say what I think, and then maybe John can add something. I think a way forward as a chapter heading, you wouldn't necessarily have a whole chapter on that, but I think most dissertations are going to have a way forward of some description in them, because otherwise why have you talked about this thing if it's not going somewhere? You know what I mean? Either in terms of, you know, policy implications or further research or different ways of thinking about theory or something. Why have we talked about this? What do we do with this information now? I think you would need to talk about that in some way. John, did you want to say anything? As I think, yeah.
Yeah, I would want to echo that response, and also to say, Dechen, I think that's a great question, because there are students who at least at the outset are thinking and hoping that their dissertation can be linked to some kind of policy recommendation, something that we often, you know, make a point of discouraging, because we really want students to try and grapple with issues of understanding the world as it is, rather than moving on to creating the world as it should be, or, you know, speculating or imagining the world as it should be. So I agree with Sarah that it may well be, and it is hopefully the case, that your dissertation conclusions are suggestive, indicative of some implications for policy, or that there are implications in terms of further research, you know, so that, you know, so one can imagine at the end of a dissertation to say, insofar as this dissertation has correctly answered this question, it suggests, you know, these sorts of implications and so forth. But I don't think it's not on that basis that your dissertation will have been read, or that it will be assessed in terms of your success in addressing the question posed. Because the way forward, as in life, the way forward is ambiguous. It is just, you know, heading towards the horizon. So if stylistically and suggestively you'd like to end that way, that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think it's something to dwell on or to organize a section of the dissertation around. I think that would be a mistake to you know, unless you think you're capable of extrapolating from your conclusions about something specific to say something that engages with other literature and spells it out in an analytically sophisticated way relative to, you know, other arguments, other cases, and so forth, for which there's some kind of grounding analytically and or empirically.
Thank you, Professor.
I have a question, and it's referring to the theoretical framework and the methodology and yeah, this, or the rationale in general. I just wanted to know, for the theoretical framework in general, do we have to have like, is there like a maximum of theories that we can draw from, or because I understand it should be focused, but some theories are very related to each other, and I don't really know how to define or how to determine how many to choose.
Again, this might be a question for John. I'll give my brief answer and then I'll hand over to him. Generally, a theoretical framework is called a framework because the theories kind of are, it's either one theory, like we saw that example of the Gramscian hegemony, or some theories that are very closely related. But the point of a theoretical framework is a way of looking at something. So, for example, if you looked at a political event that happened in Iran, if you were a psychologist, you might look at it in one way. If you're a political analyst, you might look at it in another way. As an international relations theorist, you look at it in a different way. So everybody looks at things in different ways, personally for a start, but then also academically, you would look at things in different ways. That's your starting point. And then within your academic field, there are different theories that look at things in different ways. So that's kind of your purpose of your theoretical framework, is how you want to look at the problem that you're investigating. And that, in terms of how many, there isn't a number. It's going to be which ones work together and which ones help you to see or understand or analyze this thing. Might be the best way of putting it. John, do you have any clearer insight to offer?
Yeah, it's a tricky question to answer, because I think, as Sarah's suggesting, it really depends on not only the question that you're posing, but the answer that you end up pursuing. So to give another example, let's say you're writing a dissertation that's addressing the question of why the United States decided to invade Iraq in 2003. You could, if you could group, these the kinds of explanations that are there in the literature, sort of as Sarah was suggesting, in different sort of bundles. They're economic, interest-based explanations. There may be geostrategic and military explanations of the projection of American power in the Middle East. There may be decision-making, and idiosyncratic kinds of explanations that are focused on the personalities involved in making the decision. But how you would deal with that perhaps rich and overly rich literature, in terms of the time and space you would devote to discussing it, really would, I think, depend on what sort of argument you were going to pursue. right? And so let's say, for example, you decided that, well, I want to pursue the role of American Vice President Dick Cheney in the decision. So I would say probably in that context, you should spend very little time sort of going through every book and article and every decision, but instead say, well, a great deal has been written about the American decision to invade Iraq. But some of this focuses on the internal decision-making processes within the Bush White House at the time. And within that literature, there is a gap, or there are some questions about the role of Vice President Dick Cheney. So there are these differences. There's a debate on that particular point. So I think it really depends if you're writing about the dispute over the South China Sea, you can't write about every little island and every country involved, but instead depending on what you're going to focus on, I think you need to kind of move in and kind of acknowledge it. It's like, imagine you're driving down the highway and to say, okay, I can see that, we're passing the city on the left, we're passing this town on the right, but we're heading in this direction. And you kind of, really have to cite your landmarks. You can't stop everywhere. You can't note everything along the side of the highway. So I think it's about navigating and intellectual landmarks that are important to cite as you are bringing your reader along to understand how you want to signpost and signify the specificity of your argument, as opposed to alternative specificities.
I just have a quick question. In regards to the synopsis and bibliography that we have to submit, how far do we actually have to come to an answer or provide, a particular framework that we will be arguing for? Because in my case, I'm still kind of deliberating. I'm still kind of forming the puzzle. I don't know if I'm behind or.
You mean for purposes of the synopsis?
Mm-hmm.
I think, to give your supervisor a taste of the kinds of readings that you've been doing that have been informing your thinking, in part because this might help your supervisor to say, oh, she hasn't read this book, or I can see she's only reading, from these two schools of thought and is not aware of or engaging with another literature that's kind of missing here. So I think, in terms of trying to help someone help you, put down, a good taste of what you have been reading, in part so that then your supervisor might be able to help you with what you haven't been reading.
Yeah. Thank you.
And don't forget, you're asking questions, not providing answers in your the beginning.
The hardest part of the process is figuring out the question. The answer is easy. It's like life. What are the big questions in life? Well, okay, if there aren't any more questions, then I think we should just thank Sarah for her time and her effort and her help with this process. And all of you are welcome to join further workshops and sessions and to avail of LSE Life's facilities and the advice and guidance and support they offer over the weeks and months ahead. So many thanks to Sarah, and thanks to all you guys for participating.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. It was lovely to, I was going to say meet you all, but I recognize lots of names. I think you've been to workshops before. Yeah. Thanks, folks. John, very quick question about the recording. There are bits in the middle where students are in breakout rooms and where it's you and me chatting. So I might try and edit those out.
Okay, that's okay. I mean, we didn't say anything indiscreet.
No, I just thought it might not be interesting for the students listening to us.
Or it might be interesting.
It might be interesting. I'll have a quick look and see if anything that obviously needs editing, and then I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for everything.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.